So Dr. Cécile Rousseau is a professor at McGill University Division of Social and Cultural Psychiatry and holds a Canada Research Chair in the prevention of violent radicalization. She's worked extensively with immigrant and refugee communities, developing specific school-based interventions and leading policy-oriented research. Presently, her research focuses on intervention and prevention programs to address social polarization and violent radicalization. So we're happy to have Dr. Rousseau with us today.
Thank you. We're not taking that, huh? You hear me? Perfect. Okay, so it's a pleasure to be with you. Just a little warning, because the topic of my talk may be uncomfortable. We and I, so it's a we because we're a team. We're doing a lot of research on what's happening in our world. So I have a lot of data. We have a lot of data. I won't present everything today, but because it's going so rapidly and because it's so delicate and sensitive, I invite you to disagree. Importantly, because if we cannot, and that's something we've talked about with Lawrence, if we cannot among ourselves disagree to try to think what's happening in our society, if we cannot disagree with different strategy, including moments where we deny and moments where we dramatize, then we're not able to think that together. And my claim, and that's why I wanted to share that with you today, that it's important for us as clinicians and as people in the health profession to think what's happening in our world and the clinical consequences. So I have no commercial conflict of interest. Will not disclose the other conflicts of interest, but commercial ones are not there. We'll go with rapid transformation of violence. So we'll go first in the first part of my presentation with attitudes. Youth culture is changing. Our culture is changing. And youth culture is changing as a reflect of our own societal and world paradoxes. So it's a deforming mirror, which is a bit scary to look in. And that's the first part of my presentation. Then for vulnerable individuals, for people with mental health problems and disorder, they may be particularly shattered and vulnerable to what's happening in our world, especially because of the online world. So I'll talk about youth. What does that mean for us as clinicians in the second part of my talk? The idea of a perfect storm. So the idea that what's happening now is not unprecedented, a lot in common with what happened in 1930 in terms of economic hardship and uncertainty. Climate change is added, and because of globalization, the shattering of identities is also an added factor. It's important because, our society boasts about identity, plurality, and flexibility. And us as EDI supporter, we do that. And it's very important. It's a gift. It's a richness. Now, the edge of identity flexibility is identity confusion. And identity confusion is associated with violence. So you see the thing with globalization, we're moving out of well-established identity, the religious one, the ethnic, the national, the gender ones, and this is good with an edge. The edge is falling into confusion, which brings to reactive crystallization of previous identity and to violence. The acceleration factor is the internet. So the virtual world is not causal, but it's accelerating and transforming communication and mentalization and dialogue processes in absolutely unprecedented ways. To take a very bad example, Goebbels was saying, a lie which is repeated 1,000 times become a truth. Now, on internet, a lie which is repeated 3 billionth time is structuring what we think and what we do. So populism in that context is accelerating the propagation of hate and the glorification of dystopic violence. There is a very important and recent semantic shift. If you look at the use of hate by North American authorities in the last few weeks, hate is becoming synonymous for disagreement. That's what I call an inversion. Political divergencies is becoming synonymous for terrorism. So when we use these words, it's very important to be conscious of the semantic shift and of the way they're being inverted and re-instrumentalized, weaponized in the virtual world, because we do not have presently shared agreements around the use of hate, terrorism, extremism. Okay, and this is very important because otherwise we use that as if there is common sense around those very powerful words. There is not for the moment, and they're being used by all sides in a very, very radical but also damaging ways. The emergence, and tomorrow is the 6th of December, and I had all these radio and television interviews around the remembrance of Polytechnic massacres. And I would like to say it was terrible and we're progressing. And that's not true. We are not progressing. We are regressing in terms of women's rights. That's true not only in Quebec, not only in Canada. It's true at the world level. And it's Antonio Gutierrez who's saying at the world level, the women's rights are now on. But the problem is that the collective and societal response that we have, the politically collective, and you may like Barbie, but nobody wants to be a Ken. No, but it's important is the politically response to masculinism are not addressing the underlying distress, rage, the death by despair, which is measured in the center state of the United States with an over mortality and morbidity and mortality in white men. So can we read the fear under the hate? If we do not hear the fear under the hate, our responses are out of space, at the best, ineffective, at the worst, they worsen the problem. Just like we did during the COVID, when we called all the anti-vax stupid, egoistic criminals, we made things worse. It didn't change anything. And so we have to rethink the politically correct and societal response now, because it may be part of the problem. I want at that time, because you're there, Pascal, to mention a very interesting conversation we had. We also want to, and it's a double-edged strategy, and that's why we discussed it. I remember your remark, to censor things which should not have a place in our society. So we will not accept hateful discourse. We will not accept the word in N. And we had an interesting conversation on that. Not accepting it, not accepting disrespect is very important, okay, or attack to others. Now, is the fact of not representing the hate, not representing the past, is it making it disappear, or is it denying the problem? Okay, so it's the whole idea of and it's a big question, and Pascal can address it much better than I. But because you're there, I dare to raise this interesting debate, is what do we do with our profound disagreement with things which are hurtful presently in our society? Do we try to put them below the carpet or not? Okay, sorry for that. I had discussion with some of our psychiatry department colleague. For some people, this is not a Hitlerian salute. For me, no, wait, but Lawrence, it's important. We have disagreement among ourselves. For me, it is. Uh, uh, I don't know if you follow the present controversy in the alt-right in the US, because, with they are very scary. That you believe that this is or not a Hitlerian salute, I won't agree on that. I will just say there are disagreement among us, and they reflect either our dramatization or our denial of what's going on. What is important is that I work with adolescents, to a 14-year-old in schools in Quebec or in Ontario, and I had an interview with Alberta on this. If they do this gesture, whatever it is, they'll get suspended. And so they'll say, how come I get suspended when the richest and the most powerful men in the world can rape women, be sexual offenders, rob, non-respect all international convention, and do this kind of things, and nothing will happen to them? They won't even get blamed? Okay, that's called double standard. And that fragilizes the legitimacy of our institution. So are we credible when after we lecture these youth saying, oh, you should, this is very bad, but you're trying to talk with those guys? You want their attention? Okay, isn't it a bit paradoxical? So we have to examine the paradoxes of our society, because that's what young people are telling us, is you don't make sense. And they are right. So what's happening in young people now is the emergence, and that's very, going very fast and very worrisome, of non-ideological violence, which we call nihilistic violence. So it's really a Nietzschean position to say we are not in a utopian world, humanistic position. In fact, in human society and in our world, what prevails is evil, and crime pays. And for the moment, it's very difficult to say they're wrong at the level of what's going on in the world. So we may, and I firmly believe that's not the case. And I still believe in humankind. But I think we have to take it seriously when they say at the level of the world, for the moment, it's going nowhere. And you have all this interest online of young people for the end of the world, for apocalypse, and it's very powerful, and it's religious and non-religious interest for the end of the world, which is really saying human beings are evil, and because evil prevail, if you use evil, you'll get rich and you'll get powerful, and this is a way to go. So forget about morality. So of course we disagree, but I think we should hear that this is addressing some of our paradoxes. If we don't hear the critique, the social critique on that, we will moralize, and that's not working. Okay, I won't go into that. It's translated and that, so you see that from 2003 to 2024, the trivialization of violence, and that's for the whole of Canada, in especially young people, so 18 to 34, the light blue line has passed from 13% to 36%, and the steep is very steep. Lack of purpose and disconnectedness are also present. So what our research has shown at the population, so we're at the attitude level repeatedly, is that in fact what we call grievances, so exposure to violence and discrimination, is mediated by depression. And there it's why it's important for us as mental health professional and linked to sympathy for violent radicalization or to glorification of violence. So it's important to see that emotion have a key mediating role, distress have a key mediating role between grievances you could say adversity, life hurting, and violence. Again, nothing new, but it's just very powerful. Identity issues are important. And so we had a follow-up cohort study showing that in 2016 in college, we had a nonlinear relation between identity and violence. So if you have a unique, very strong identity, if you're just something, just a man, just Quebecois, just Canadian, just American, just Republican, the chances that you dehumanize the other is greater. Now, if you have a strong identity and accept the others, then it's protected. And that was our first relation. Now, 2 years after, it has changed. And that is what we see now, the crystallization. So it becomes a linear relation, okay, where our identities may be protective, but they may also kind of make us apart from others. And you have a lot of research in the US on that, on gender growing apart, political party, Democrats and Republican growing apart. But we are not immune to that. In our society, we are growing apart. So how do we think the link between social polarization and violence? Maybe just insist on a thing. We tend to think of intersectionality as cumulative. You remember, for those who use intersectionality, if you're a woman, and if you're gay, and if you're Black, and if you're poor, all of these level of identity will add up cumulatively to increase your exposure to adversities. This is a way usually we use intersectionality. Now, in our society, intersectionality is becoming largely conflictual, true in the US also. So you have increasingly minorities opposing, for example, LGBTQ communities, or gender issues between different communities, and poverty being a major determinant of adversity and suffering, opposing majority people to minorities. So we have an upsurge, very concerning, in xenophobia, anti-immigrant, anti-refugee, anti-religion in Quebec. All the tension you can name are on the upsurge. But the big thing is that they are opposing, and that's used by populism and political party, both here and in the US, but they're opposing groups of society who are all touched by adversity. And thus, we need to rethink the solution, because if we say somebody is right, somebody is wrong, whatever side you take, you will increase the rift and fight among marginalized group of the society for diverse reason. And so we have to rethink, while keeping our values, to rethink our strategies. High school study, 25% of kids in the high schools in Quebec think that guns and bombs are cool. So glorification of violence is important. And then there's, I don't want to go into that, but what you see is that the adolescent, the first item on climate change, so they converge more on climate change. Well, when you look at masculinism, for example, the fact that a boy should control who his girlfriend is seeing is around 20%. And the fact that girls say no, but in fact they think yes, is also 20%. So you have all these rise in masculinism, but also xenophobia and the rest. Now, one of the things which is important in terms of prevention, I'm going first to talk about prevention, is that if you think that all of these attitudes lead directly to violence, you merge protest and possible violence. And then you will profile and, in a sense, criminalize or psychopathologize youth. What we tried in different research, I don't have time to talk about it, is to distinguish what is resistance, what is protest, what is provocation to us and to our political correctness, from what is actual push toward violence. Because if we do not do that, if we merge all idioms of protest, then we aggravate what youth are telling us in numerous researches. We don't feel heard, we feel prescribed. You tell us what to think, what to say, what to do. We have no space in this society. And that is what we need to hear if we want to work at the prevention level. Prevention space, I'll talk. So that's a mural who was done by schools, by the Muslim school in Quebec after the Quebec massacre in the mosque, and by the Quebec school in the surrounding. So it's 2 or 3 schools coming together in building this mural after the Quebec. And it's about, so I have no time to go into prevention, but how do you use art, metaphor, to go back to the work of Lawrence, symbols, alternate forms of expressing oneself to create these space for voice, which are not too hurtful, not too conflictual, and who can bring people together in a nice way. And I think presently we're opening a lot of space in school. I think we have, in the last year, we had 50 demands from school in all over Quebec about misogyny, xenophobia, racism, LGBT, homophobia, transphobia, all of that. How do we create space to talk about that? Because the present programs are not working. Now, that's risky, but to address the present program, we need to take some risk, and to take the risk of hearing things which are unpleasant and holding the uncomfort. These are not safe space, but they can be and stay respectful space while being uncomfortable. So what are some prevention dilemmas? Proximal prevention, targeted prevention have worsened things. The great examples that after Columbine, targeting and trying to detect who's violent in the US has resulted in more school shootings. It's a total disaster because it's a paranoid stance and it leads to distrust. So if I'm in despair and I'm enraged, I will not tell you because you will think I'm a criminal. So thinking is becoming, and that's, it's a perfect demonstration of what not to do. It has happened also after 9/11, and it has happened with Islamophobia. So all security agencies around the world, 5 minutes, okay, have targeted Muslim community, and that has created distrust, hurt, and more problems. Let me go quickly. Okay. Let me switch to intervention, okay? Because I want at least 5 minutes to talk about intervention. So we see people, what I wanted to show you is how our, so that's a paper was just being published, how kids under 18 are different from the over 18. So the nihilistic type of violence is 46%, and I would say even greater a year after in minors, whereas it's half of that in people above 18. Far right are the second in the young. So our youth, our adolescent, and it's becoming younger and younger, are supporting glorification of violence, nihilistic way of thinking, and the far right. The online environment, and we may allude to that in questions eventually, is presently very, very scary. And for us as mental health professionals, it's important to see that things like self-harm, suicide, eating disorder are being actively weaponized online to recruit and involve these youth into these nihilistic movements. And there are even online false resources, help resources, which mimic health and mental health resources to further hook people and weaponize them. So this is a very scary environment because very difficult to distinguish what's right, what's wrong, with adults like us being totally appalled and afraid of the online world, and usually even in our ER, not asking young people, what are you looking at? Or in ways which do not elicit trust, okay? Because they're just going to be said no, so they won't talk to adults about what they do. Online world is presently very unsafe for young people. At the diagnostic level, orange are the minors, so the youth. So you see a predominance of stress-related disorder. The bad news is life hurts. The good news is their better outcome, okay? ASD, because they undergo so much bullying, are also very important. Why is very important, if you look at the blue also, is that our findings in Quebec align with the FBI finding on active shooters. Contrary to myth, it's not the psychotic people or the personality disorder who are mass shooters. It's people with mood disorder, anxiety disorder, or trauma and life hurting. This is very important because we don't see these people as distressed. We see them as either crazy or bad, which is not the case. They are really our clientele. Okay, so maybe finishing with some clinical dilemmas. Clinical intervention works. We have trajectory analysis 4 years, 5 years after. It's very long, demanding, resource intensive, but it works. So that's the good news. There's a flip side, the risk of pathologizing dissent, individualizing social suffering, when we, I think, have a sick society now. Burden of double stigma, being both socially excluded and crazy. But the problem is that presently the response to hateful discourse or violent discourse is coercions, rules, value, and they do not heal youth despair and distress. In fact, and we see that a lot with the judicial system, and even our colleagues may refer youth who express despair and homicidal wish to the police in our ER. So it's really our incapacity to process that. Punishing despair is utterly dangerous. So strictly from a societal point of view, even without any empathy, it's not a good idea. Okay, so there are a number of implications. At the research level, the thing is things are going so rapidly and changing from one year to the other that we cannot rely on evidence-based, which will be produced in 10 years, and it will tell us in 10 years what certainly we should have done now. Could be not useful, but we tend to do that. So we have to change that. Primary prevention should be separate from secondary and tertiary prevention because otherwise it will be security oriented and will bounce back. It's really about a systemic social justice perspective, very hard to do presently, but it requires, and that we could do, democratic communication and allowing youth protection agency. We have to hear what's uncomfortable for us. They have good reason to be unhappy with our legacy. Intervention is moving beyond silo and accepting that if suicide may decrease and homicide ideation increase, it's still our problem and we still can do something about it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rousseau, for a very passionate and stimulating talk. Do we have any questions from the audience? And I think we have a microphone that works now. Yes, there we go. Thanks.
Hello. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. That was such a stimulating talk. And it kind of comes back to this concern, which I feel like Judy Herman raises in her book, Justice and Repair, which is responding to a social problem with clinical interventions, and kind of that paradox of society is unfair. The actual leadership is not, like the majority of privilege is kind of held by a certain demographic of our society. They're not willing to let go of that privilege. There isn't actually, at a political level, a wish for, more equity and more justice. And yet here we are using all of these clinical resources to kind of address a social problem. So I was just curious. I have two parts. One is I'm just curious to hear your thoughts on this paradox of addressing political and social problems from a clinical sphere, because I feel like as you know, I do complex trauma work, which is ultimately the same thing, where we're basically repairing social violence and injustice through therapy. And then my other thing is just last week, I was learning about this new intervention, an AI-based intervention for incels, and launched in Quebec, where it's like they've created Marie, this like fake dating person who will then interact with the incel and kind of, it's just being piloted, but there's kind of a plan of déploiement, and then kind of ultimately then end up rejecting the guy. And then there's a therapist there to help them process the rejection. And so I was kind of curious to hear your thoughts about these AI-based interventions around for incels.
Okay. So for the first level, our team advocate that we should act at both levels. So, and without going out of our discipline or our expertise. At the attitude level, at the societal level, things are social, political, economic, but they are also psychological because of the psychologization or the politicization of emotions. Okay, so we have to add a psychological dimension and thinking in primary prevention. In how do you address that in class? How do you address Andrew Tate, for example? If you say you cannot talk about him, he's bad, you just kind of close the dialogue. Now, if you address it, it could be hurtful for girls in the class to hear why their peers think he's such a cool guy. So you have to handle this. It's not easy. And I think that we have an expertise here to say, okay, how do we help school teams, for example, for majority women who feel very hurt by this kind of misogynistic discourse, to not enact their rage or fear, and to be able to listen. Beyond the discourse, there is at the attitude level a lot of things which are right, which you can hear, which you can support, and you can say, I hear you on that, I understand that, I agree with you, but with that, I disagree. I agree that, about a lot of things, but not with the last part. Okay, so I think in prevention, it's not for us to work only. We're not queens or king in the field. We should co-work with people in education, in the social field, and so on. We have a unique contribution. Otherwise, it's recuperated by security side in a continuum, and that's dangerous. So that's my claim for prevention. Now, at the clinical level, we could say there are pros and cons, but for the moment, if we do not do it, these vulnerable people who are being weaponized online, they will act it out. And so what we're showing is that if you address social isolation, you decrease the social isolation, work on a sense of purpose, decrease the distress, and reinscribe these people with a project, it works. The ideology does not. We even have a patient who said, "Well, I'm still pro-white and a very good Nazi, but I don't want to kill anybody anymore." So you could say, "Is this a good outcome or a bad outcome?" I would argue with you that if you think it's a bad outcome, but at least but he's saying, but now I want to have a job, and I want to I am envisioning I have a girlfriend, and we're thinking of a family. Okay, well, no, but he could. So I do think that clinically there is a space to act and to hear those very isolated people who are talking up their despair. I think that we should do, and just not say we'll send them to the police. And working with their family, I'm looking at Sharon on top, is very effective, because you kind of families are being part of the problem, but being an essential part of the solution. Second question, yes, it's a project done by Haida Hassan and our colleagues, so I do know about it. It's interesting. I would say ChatGPT and AI in our clientele can be the better and the worse. So some of our patients with their ChatGPT or AI friend, they have found a place for expression who have decreased their rage. And it's a benevolent voice who listen to them, and they feel good. And in fact, it has a positive effect. We had the reversed. So it's a double-edged sword. I would be, at this moment, absolutely reluctant to say it's a universal solution. It's not. I think it could be very dangerous, but it has also proved useful. In the specific thing that you're talking, because we helped them pilot it, and we were very young people working with our team did that, and they were very ambivalent, because the bot, so the robot, kept on saying, well, I hear you, I understand you. And then the guy who was doing the pretest grew up very angry, and he's not in his thing. This is utterly annoying. If a girl was doing that. Exactly. So could it be a tool? It's part of our world, certainly. Let's be very critical.
Maybe one more question before we go to our discussion. There'll be another chance at the end.
We have more.
Well,
So I just have so I have a patient. I may be a little bit confused in asking the question. So I have a patient who is beginning of 20, who basically is living a double life between the Arab world and then the Quebec world, who is emotionally unstable, so BPD, who also has antisocial traits like callousness, manipulation, deceitfulness, and a strong sense of kind of like this injustice. I work at First Line, so I have 12 sessions. What should I look out for because of this double life? On the one side, the answer to the problem is you have to pray more. On the other side, there's this anger that the partner is not doing what they told them to do. And then this emotional instability that comes with it. So I have a couple of questions. What should I look out for in terms of potential online? Because there's also a strong pornography interest, strong social media. What are some of the warning signs that I should look out for? And I understand to kind of look for the underlying fear, that injustice, to kind of work on that and maybe open the mind and take different perspectives. But is there anything else I should do or include or?
No, you're right. So what you really want to see is identify the grievances and identify the protective factors. Okay, what you're mentioning suggests that there is what we call hybrid ideology, so that you have bits and pieces of different ideology or different forms consuming different forms of violence, which is prevalent now. So once upon a time, if you were a communist, you had to read Karl Marx's Capital, or if you were a Nazi, Mein Kampf. But it's not the case anymore. So now you have a lot in young people, this kind of hybrid salad bar ideology, where you put together things which have, when we talk about ideology, a structuring effect. which could be protective or not protective. So you're looking really, and there is a literature on grievances related work. You're really looking at grievances. What our data show with time is grievances do not necessarily move with treatment, but protection factors increase. And that is what leads to positive outcome. So the worst thing, and which is very much linked to risk, but that's also true in professional structure adjustments instruments, which are the less bad that we had to assess threats, is that so your network being isolated is an enormous risk. And of course, substance abuse, but that's something else. But if you have a network, so the isolation, the grievances, and staying just online are really risk factor. So you're trying to increase protective factors. Now, what you're saying about the 12 session is important. And this is something we're trying to bring to at the ministry level. We are able to make change. There's nothing which changed in the first 6 months, nothing, okay? The risk remains and it changed afterward, but it takes 2 to 4 years to change with intensive wraparound intervention. If you take the societal cost of one mass attack, just avoiding one mass attack would pay for all these services throughout the province for a long time because it's an enormous social cost. So the idea is after your session or even before the end, you're still worried, try to see if you can put together a network to go on with the support. So what you're doing is right, but go on with this support beyond the 12th session. If you're worried, call us. We consult throughout the province and throughout Quebec, but really, and we can help you with your SUS prioritizing this patient, okay? Because this is what we need to do, to say, this is not good. It's not, we should go beyond our protocol to say, we need this network of support. It works, but it takes time. Oh, well, I can give you that. Okay. We have a line 7 days a week, and it's always a clinician who answers. It's 8 to 8 at night, and we have no waiting list. So we don't take we help people like you, throughout the province. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Rousseau. That was wonderful.